James Watt, by Andrew Carnegie. Chapter 7, Part 2. Watt encountered the difficulties of different weights and measures in his studies of foreign writers upon chemistry, a serious inconvenience, which still remains with us. He wrote Mr. Kirwan, November, 1783: I had a great deal of trouble in reducing the weights and measures to speak the same language, and many of the German experiments become still more difficult from their using different weights and different divisions of them in different parts of that empire. It is therefore a very desirable thing to have these difficulties removed, and to get all philosophers to use pounds divided in the same manner, and I flatter myself that may be accomplished if you, Dr. Priestley, and a few of the French experimenters will agree to it, for the utility is so evident that every thinking person must immediately be convinced of it. Here follows his plan. Let the philosophical pound consist of 10 ounces, or 10,000 grains. The ounce consist of 10 drachms, or 1,000 grains. The drachm consist of 100 grains. Let all elastic fluids be measured by the ounce measure of water, by which the valuation of different cubic inches will be avoided, and the common decimal tables of specific gravities will immediately give the weights of those elastic fluids. If all philosophers cannot agree on 1 pound or 1 grain, let every one take his own pound or his own grain. It will affect nothing but doses of medicines, which must be corrected as is now done. But as it would be much better that the identical pound was used by all, I would propose that the Amsterdam or Paris pound be assumed as the standard, being now the most universal in Europe. It is to our avoirdupois pound as 109 is to 100. Our avoirdupois pound contains 7,000 of our grains, and the Paris pound 7,630 of our grains, but it contains 9,376 Paris grains, so that the division into 10,000 would very little affect the Paris grain. I prefer dividing the pound afresh to beginning with the Paris grain, because I believe the pound is very general, but the grain local. Dr. Priestley has agreed to this proposal, and has referred it to you to fix upon the pound if you otherwise approve of it. I shall be happy to have your opinion of it as soon as convenient, and to concert with you the means of making it universal. I have some hopes that the foot may be fixed by the pendulum and a measure of water, and a pound derived from that. But in the interim let us at least assume a proper division, which from the nature of it must be intelligible as long as decimal arithmetic is used. He afterward wrote, in a letter to Magellan: As to the precise foot or pound, I do not look upon it to be very material, in chemistry at least. Either the common English foot may be adopted according to your proposal, which has the advantage that a cubic foot is exactly 1,000 ounces, consequently the present foot and ounce would be retained. Or a pendulum which vibrates 100 times a minute may be adopted for the standard, which would make the foot 14.2 of our present inches, and the cubic foot would be very exactly a bushel, and would weigh 101 of the present pounds, so that the present pound would not be much altered. But I think that by this scheme the foot would be too large, and that the inconvenience of changing all the foot measures, and things depending on them, would be much greater than changing all the pounds, bushels, gallons, etc. I therefore give the preference to those plans which retain the foot and ounce. The war of the standards still rages, metric or decimal or no change. What each nation has is good enough for it in the opinion of many of its people. Some day an international commission will doubtless assemble to bring order out of chaos. As far as the English-speaking race is concerned, it seems that a decided improvement could readily be effected with very trifling, indeed scarcely perceptible changes. Especially is this so with money values. Britain could merge her system with those of Canada and America by simply making her pound the exact value of the American $5, it being now only 10 pence less; her silver coinage 1 and 2 shillings equal to quarter and half dollars, the present coin to be recoined upon presentation, but meanwhile to pass current. Weights and measures are more difficult to assimilate. Science, being world-wide and knowing no divisions, should use uniform terms. Alas! At the distance of nearly a century and a half we seem no nearer the prospect of a system of universal weights and measures than in Watt's day. But Watt's idea is not to be lost sight of for all that. He was a seer who often saw what was to come. We have referred to the absence of holidays in Watt's strenuous life, but Birmingham was remarkable for a number of choice spirits who formed the celebrated Lunar Society, whose members were all devoted to the pursuit of knowledge and mutually agreeable to one another. Besides Watt and Boulton, there were Dr. Priestley, discoverer of oxygen gas, Dr. Darwin, Dr. Withering, Mr. Keir, Mr. Galton, Mr. Wedgwood of Wedgwood ware fame, who had monthly dinners at their respective houses. Hence the Lunar Society. Dr. Priestley, discoverer of oxygen, who arrived in Birmingham in 1780, has repeatedly mentioned the great pleasure he had in having Watt for a neighbor. He says, "I consider my settlement at Birmingham as the happiest event in my life, being highly favorable to every object I had in view, philosophical or theological. In the former respect I had the convenience of good workmen of every kind, and the society of persons eminent for their knowledge of chemistry, particularly Mr. Watt, Mr. Keir, and Dr. Withering. These, with Mr. Boulton and Dr. Darwin, who soon left us by removing from Lichfield to Derby, Mr. Galton, and afterwards Mr. Johnson of Kenilworth, and myself, dined together every month, calling ourselves the Lunar Society, because the time of our meeting was near the full moon, in order, as he elsewhere says, to have the benefit of its light in returning home." Richard Lovell Edgeworth says of this distinguished coterie, "By means of Mr. Keir I became acquainted with Dr. Small of Birmingham, a man esteemed by all who knew him, and by all who were admitted to his friendship beloved with no common enthusiasm. Dr. Small formed a link which combined Mr. Boulton, Mr. Watt, Dr. Darwin, Mr. Wedgwood, Mr. Day, and myself together, men of very different characters, but all devoted to literature and science. This mutual intimacy has never been broken but by death, nor have any of the number failed to distinguish themselves in science or literature. Some may think that I ought with due modesty to except myself, Mr. Keir, with his knowledge of the world and good sense, Dr. Small, with his benevolence and profound sagacity, Wedgwood, with his increasing industry, experimental variety, and calm investigation, Boulton, with his mobility, quick perception, and bold adventure, Watt, with his strong inventive faculty, undeviating steadiness, and bold resources, Darwin, with his imagination, science, and poetical excellence, and Day, with his unwearied research after truth, his integrity and eloquence, proved altogether such a society as few men have had the good fortune to live with, such an assemblage of friends as fewer still have had the happiness to possess and keep through life." The society continued to exist until the beginning of the century, 1800. Watt was the last surviving member. The last reference is Dr. Priestley's dedication to it, in 1793, of one of his works, Experiments on the Generation of Air from Water, in which he says, "There are few things that I more regret in consequence of my removal from Birmingham than the loss of your society. It both encouraged and enlightened me, so that what I did there of a philosophical kind ought in justice to be attributed almost as much to you as to myself. From our cheerful meetings I never absented myself voluntarily, and from my pleasing recollection they will never be absent. Should the cause of our separation make it necessary for me to remove to a still greater distance from you, I shall only think the more, and with the more regret, of our past interviews. Philosophy engrossed us wholly. Politicians may think there are no objects of any consequence besides those which immediately interest them, but objects far superior to any of which they have an idea engaged our attention, and the discussion of them was accompanied with a satisfaction to which they are strangers. Happy would it be for the world if their pursuits were as tranquil, and their projects as innocent, and as friendly to the best interests of mankind, as ours." That the partners, Boulton and Watt, had such pleasure amid their lives of daily cares, all will be glad to know. It was not all humdrum money-making nor intense inventing. There was the society of gifted minds, the serene atmosphere of friendship in the high realms of mutual regard, best recreation of all. In 1786 quite a break in their daily routine took place. In that year, Messrs. Boulton and Watt visited Paris to meet proposals for their erecting steam engines in France under an exclusive privilege. They were also to suggest improvements on the great hydraulic machine of Marly. Before starting, the sagacious and patriotic Watt wrote to Boulton, "I think if either of us go to France, we should first wait upon Mr. Pitt, Prime Minister, and let him know our errand thither, that the tongue of slander may be silenced, all undue suspicion removed, and ourselves rendered more valuable in his eyes, because others desire to have us." They had a flattering reception in Paris from the ministry, who seemed desirous that they should establish engine works in France. This they absolutely refused to do, as being contrary to the interests of their country. It may be feared we are not quite so scrupulous in our day. On the other hand, refusal now would be fruitless, it has become so easy to obtain plans, and even experts, to build machines for any kind of product in any country. Automatic machinery has almost dispelled the need for so-called skilled labor. East Indians, Mexicans, Japanese, Chinese, all become more or less efficient workers with a few months' experience. Manufacturing is therefore to spread rapidly throughout the world. All nations may be trusted to develop, and if necessary for a time protect, their natural resources as a patriotic duty. Only when prolonged trials have been made can it be determined which nation can best and most cheaply provide the articles for which raw material abounds. The visit to Paris enabled Watt and Boulton to make the acquaintance of the most eminent men of science, with whom they exchanged ideas afterward in frequent and friendly correspondence. Watt described himself as being, upon one occasion, drunk from morning to night with Burgundy and undeserved praise. The latter was always a disconcerting draught for our subject, anything but reference to his achievements for the modest, self-effacing genius. While in Paris, Berthollet told Watt of his new method of bleaching by chlorine, and gave him permission to communicate it to his father-in-law, who adopted it in his business, together with several improvements of Watt's invention, the results of a long series of experiments. Watt, writing to Mr. Macgregor, April 27, 1787, says, "In relation to the inventor, he is a man of science, a member of the Academy of Sciences at Paris, and a physician, not very rich, a very modest and worthy man, and an excellent chemist. My sole motives in meddling with it were to procure such reward as I could to a man of merit who had made an extensively useful discovery in the arts, and secondly, I had an immediate view to your interest. As to myself, I had no lucrative views whatsoever, it being a thing out of my way, which both my business and my health prevented me from pursuing further than it might serve for amusement when unfit for more serious business. Lately, by a letter from the inventor, he informs me that he gives up all intentions of pursuing it with lucrative views, as he says he will not compromise his quiet and happiness by engaging in business, in which perhaps he is right. But if the discovery has real merit, as I apprehend, he is certainly entitled to a generous reward, which I would wish for the honour of Britain to procure for him. But I much fear, in the way you state it, that nothing could be got worth his acceptance." France has been distinguished for men of science who have thus refrained from profiting by their inventions. Pasteur, in our day, perhaps the most famous of all, the liver, not only of the simple, but of the ideal life, laboring for the good of humanity, service to man, and taking for himself the simple life, free from luxury, palace, estate, and all the inevitable cares accompanying ostentatious living. Berthollet preceded him. Like Agassiz, these gifted souls were too busy to make money. In 1792, when Boulton had passed the allotted 80 years and 10, and Watt was over 80, they made a momentous decision which brought upon them several years of deep anxiety. Fortunately, the sons of the veterans who had recently been admitted to the business proved of great service in managing the affair, and relieved their parents of much labor and many journeys. Fortunate indeed were Watt and Boulton in their partnership, for they became friends first and partners afterward. They were not less fortunate in each having a talented son who also became friends and partners like their fathers before them. The decision was that the infringers of their patents were to be proceeded against. They had to appeal to the law to protect their rights. Watt met the apparently inevitable fate of inventors. Rivals arose in various quarters to dispute his right to rank as the originator of many improvements. No reflection need be made upon most rival claimants to inventions. Some wonderful result is conceived to be within the range of possibility, which, being obtained, will revolutionize existing modes. A score of inventive minds are studying the problem throughout the civilized world. Every day or two some new idea flashes upon one of them and vanishes, or is discarded after trial. One day the announcement comes of triumphant success with the very same idea slightly modified, the modification or addition, slight though this may be, making all the difference between failure and success. The man has arrived with the key that opens the door of the treasure house. He sets the egg on end, perhaps by as obvious a plan as chipping the end. There arises a chorus of strenuous claimants, each of whom had thought of that very device long ago. No doubt they did. They are honest in their protests, and quite persuaded in their own minds that they, and not the Watt of the occasion, are entitled to the honor of original discovery. This very morning we read in the press a letter from the son of Morse, vindicating his father's right to rank as the father of the telegraph, a son of Vail, one of his collaborators, having claimed that his father, and not Morse, was the real inventor. The most august of all bodies of men, since its decisions overrule both Congress and President, the Supreme Court of the United States, has shown rare wisdom from its inception, and in no department more clearly than in that regarding the rights of inventors. No court has had such experience with patent claims, for no nation has a tithe of the number to deal with. Throughout its history, the court has attached more and more importance to two points. First, is the invention valuable? Second, who proved this in actual practice? These points largely govern its decisions. The law expenses of their suits seemed to Boulton and Watt exorbitant, even in that age of low prices, compared to our own. One solicitor's bill was for no less than $30,000, which caused Watt, years afterward, when speaking of an enormous charge, to say that it would not have disgraced a London solicitor. When we find, however, that this was for 4 years' services, the London solicitor appears in a different light. "In the whole affair," writes Watt to his friend Dr. Black, January 15, 1797, "nothing was so grateful to me as the zeal of our friends and the activity of our young men, which were unremitting." The first trial ended June 22, 1793, with a verdict for Watt and Boulton by the jury, subject to the opinion of the court as to the validity of the patent. On May 16, 1795, the case came on for judgment, when unfortunately the court was found divided, 2 for the patent and 2 against. Another case was tried December 16, 1796, with a special jury before Lord Chief Justice Eyre. The verdict was again for the plaintiffs. Proceedings on a writ of error had the effect of affirming the result by the unanimous opinion of the 4 judges, before whom it was ably and fully argued on 2 occasions. The testimony of Professor Robison, Watt's intimate friend of youth in Glasgow, was understood to have been deeply impressive and to have had a decisive effect upon judges and jury. All the claims of Watt were thus triumphantly sustained. The decision has always been considered of commanding importance to the law of patents in Britain, and was of vast consequence to the firm of Watt and Boulton pecuniarily. Heavy damages and costs were due from the actual defendants, and the large number of other infringers were also liable for damages. As was to have been expected, however, the firm remembered that to be merciful in the hour of victory and not to punish too hard a fallen foe was a cardinal virtue. The settlements they made were considered most liberal and satisfactory to all. Watt used frequently long afterward to refer to his specifications as his old and well-tried friends. So indeed they proved, and many references to their wonderful efficiency were made. With the beginning of the new century, 1800, the original partnership of the famous firm of Boulton and Watt expired, after a term of 25 years, as did the patents of 1769 and 1775. The term of partnership had been fixed with reference to the duration of the patents. Young men in their prime, Watt at 40 and Boulton about 50 when they joined hands, after a quarter century of unceasing and anxious labor, were disposed to resign the cares and troubles of business to their sons. The partnership therefore was not renewed by them, but their respective shares in the firm were agreed upon as the basis of a new partnership between their sons, James Watt, Jr., Matthew Robinson Boulton, and Gregory Watt, all distinguished for abilities of no mean order, and in a great degree already conversant with the business, which their wise fathers had seen fit for some years to entrust more and more to them. In nothing done by either of these two wise fathers is more wisdom shown than in their sagacious, far-seeing policy in regard to their sons. As they themselves had been taught to concentrate their energies upon useful occupation, for which society would pay as for value received, they had doubtless often conferred and concluded that was the happiest and best life for their sons, instead of allowing them to fritter away the precious years of youth in aimless frivolity, to be followed in later years by a disappointing and humiliating old age. So the partnership of Boulton and Watt was renewed in the union of the sons. Gregory Watt's premature death 4 years later was such a blow to his father that some think he never was quite himself again. Gregory had displayed brilliant talents in the higher pursuits of science and literature, in which he took delight, and great things had been predicted from him. With the other two sons the business connection continued without change for 40 years, until, when old men, they also retired like their fathers. They proved to be great managers, for, notwithstanding the cessation of the patents which opened engine-building free to all, the business of the firm increased and became much more profitable than it had ever been before. Indeed, toward the close of the original partnership, and upon the triumph gained in the patent suits, the enterprise became so profitable as fully to satisfy the moderate desire of Watt and to provide a sure source of income for his sons. This met all his wishes and removed the fears of becoming dependent that had so long haunted him. The continued and increasing success of the Soho works was obviously owing to the new partners. They had some excellent assistants, but in the foremost place among all of them stands Murdoch, Watt's able, faithful, and esteemed assistant for many years, who, both intellectually and in manly independence, was considered to exhibit no small resemblance to his revered master and friend. Never formally a partner in Soho, for he declined partnership as we have seen, he was placed on the footing of a partner by the sons in 1810, without risk, and received $5,000 per annum. From 1830 he lived in peaceful retirement and passed away in 1839. His remains were deposited in Handsworth Church, near those of his friends and employers, Watt and Boulton, the one spot on earth he could have most desired. A bust by Chantrey serves to perpetuate the remembrance of his manly and intelligent features and of the mind of which these were a pleasing index. We may imagine the shades of Watt and Boulton, those friends so appropriately laid together, greeting their friend and employee, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." If ever there was one, Murdoch was the man, and Captain Jones his fellow. We have referred to Watt's suggestion of the screw propeller, and the sketch of it sent to Dr. Small, September 30th, 1770. The only record of any earlier suggestion of steam is that of Jonathan Hull's in 1736, in which he set forth in a pamphlet entitled "A Description and Draft of a newly invented machine for carrying vessels or ships out of or into any harbor, port, or river, against wind or tide, or in a calm." London, 1737. He described a large barge equipped with a Newcomen engine to be employed as a tug, fitted with fan or paddle wheels, towing a ship of war, but nothing further appears to have been done. Writing on this subject, Mr. Williamson says: "During his last visit to Greenock in 1816, Mr. Watt, in company with his friend Mr. Walkinshaw, whom the author some years afterwards heard relate the circumstance, made a voyage in a steamboat as far as Rothsay and back to Greenock, an excursion which in those days occupied a greater portion of a whole day. Mr. Watt entered into conversation with the engineer of the boat, pointing out to him the method of backing the engine. With a foot rule he demonstrated to him what was meant. Not succeeding, however, he at last, under the impulse of the ruling passion, threw off his overcoat, and putting his hand to the engine himself, showed the practical application of his lecture. Previously to this, the backstroke of the steamboat engine was either unknown or not generally known. The practice was to stop the engine entirely, a considerable time before the vessel reached the point of mooring, in order to allow for the gradual and natural diminution of her speed. The Naval Review at Spithead, upon the close of the Crimean War in 1856, was the greatest up to that time. 10 vessels out of 250 still had not steam power, but almost all the others were propelled by the screw. the spiral oar of Watt's letter of 1770, a red-letter day for the inventor. Watt's earliest interest in locomotive steam carriages, dating from Robison's having thrown out the idea to him, was never lost. On August 12, 1768, Dr. Small writes Watt, referring to the peculiar improvements in them the latter had made previous to that date. 7 months later he apprises Watt that a patent for moving wheel carriages by steam has been taken out by one Moore, adding, "This comes of thy delays. Do come to England with all possible speed." Watt replied, "If linen-draper Moore does not use my engine to drive his chaises, he can't drive them by steam." Here Watt hit the nail on the head. As with the steamship, so with the locomotive, his steam engine was the indispensable power. In 1786 he states that he has a carriage model of some size in hand, and am resolved to try if God will work a miracle in favor of these carriages. Watt's doubt was based on the fact that they would take 20 pounds of coal and 2 cubic feet of water per horsepower on the common roads. Another of Watt's recreations in his days of semi-retirement was the improvement of lamps. He wrote the famous inventor of the Argand burner fully upon the subject in August 1787, and constructed some lamps which proved great successes. The following year he invented an instrument for determining the specific gravities of liquids, which was generally adopted. One of Watt's inventions was a new method of readily measuring distances by telescope, which he used in making his various surveys for canals. Such instruments are in general use to-day. Bro's Treatise on Mining, 10th edition, page 228, gives a very complete account of them, and states that the original instrument of this class is that invented by James Watt in 1771. In his leisure hours Watt invented an ingenious machine for drawing in perspective, using the double parallel ruler, then very little known and not at all used as far as Watt knew. Watt reports having made from 50 to 80 of these machines, which went to various parts of the world. In 1810 Watt informs Berthollet that for several years he had felt unable, owing to the state of his health, to make chemical experiments, but idle he could not be. He must be at work upon something. As he often said, "Without a hobby horse, what is life?" So the saying is reported, but we may conclude that the horse is here an interpolation, for the difference between a horse and a hobby is radical. A man can get off a horse. Watt's next hobby fortunately became an engrossing occupation and kept him alert. This was a machine for copying sculpture. A machine he had seen in Paris for tracing and multiplying the dyes of metals suggested the other. After much labor and many experiments, he did get some measure of success, and made a large head of Locke in yellow wood and a small head of his friend Adam Smith. Long did Watt toil at the new hobby in the garret where it had been created, but the garret proved too hot in summer and too cold in winter. March 14, 1810, he writes Berthollet and Levaquet, "I still do a little in mechanics, a part of which, if I live to complete it, I shall have the honor of communicating to my friends in France." He went steadily forward, and succeeded in making some fine copies in 1814. For one of Sappho he gives dates and the hours required for various parts, making a total of 39. Some censorious Sabbatarians discovered that the day he was employed 1 hour doing her breast with a 1/8 drill was Sabbath, which in one who belonged to a strict Scottish Covenanter family betokened a sad fall from grace. When we consider that his health was then precarious, that he was debarred from chemical experiments, and depended solely upon mechanical subjects, that in all probability it was a stormy day, Sunday, February 3, 1811, knowing also that Satan finds mischief still for idle hands to do, we hope our readers will pardon him for yielding to the irresistible temptation, even if on the holy Sabbath day, for once, he could not get off his captivating hobby. The historical last workshop of the great worker with all its contents remains open to the public to-day, just as it was when he passed away. Pilgrims from many lands visit it, as Shakespeare's birthplace, Burns' cottage, and Scott's Abbotsford attract their many thousands yearly. We recommend our readers to add to these this garret of Watt in their pilgrimages. End of Chapter 7, Part 2.